Okay, this is the Ancient World series by Richard Berg, and well, close up the Rise of the Roman Republic. So, what's kind of interesting about this one for me, and you've seen this with a number of games that I've covered if you watch my stuff regularly, is that this is a game I think I kind of enjoy. And there's a lot I like about it, but I'm probably going to spend more time talking about the bad points about it. And the bad points are many. The first one, and this one kind of infuriates me to tell you the truth, is that you got two full boxed games that share the same core rules, share the same large map. In terms of maps, you have this little one. Share a few, or quite a few pieces. To have some terrain on my map. I'm assuming it's my fault, but neat. Share quite a few of the same pieces, charts, tables, all kind of stuff like that. I really think the thing should have been released, had it been done correctly, and that's the other gripe. I think it should have been released as, you know, a single game and then expansions coming to it. Now, obviously, if you're not dealing with just Rome, if you started to deal with the Successors' Wars and stuff like that, with this same system, it would have to expand to what essentially would be new box games. But to me, these games share so much. There's kind of an iffy thing, though. What if you're only into the Punic Wars and you don't want to see the early Roman Wars? Or what if the other side, since we started with the Roman, you're only into one of them? So it leads you to kind of this, you wish kind of GMT could provide you two ways to get the game. You get the base game. Obviously, they can't release a base game like SFB does with, you know, no counters and just a rule book and no pieces and everything, and you just start buying stuff from there, or ASL. It's a new game. It's not going to have that kind of following. But to release the game with the opportunity to expand into the other games that essentially share the same thing. So basically, you know, you wouldn't have to do the full print run. You put out one game and you know, both games at once, say, if they do a re-release, and then kind of an expansion pack if you want them both, you know. So you buy one, get the other for an additional fee. Oh, they could even do two different expansion packs, essentially, where you start with one and you want the other. This is going to come even more into an issue when Thunderbolt's created, which is essentially going to add a Spanish map to what you have in Carthage. Do I want to pay full price for all the components in Carthage again, basically, and some additional expansions? Not really. I would rather pay, I don't know, 20, 30 bucks for something that expands it rather than a boxed game that stands alone. Of course, the problem is that the decision was made to release the least popular subject matter, you know, early Rome first, and then the first Punic War, which again doesn't have, and then the second Punic War, which is the big one. This is the game that should have been released first, probably, in terms of really catching attention. Now, luckily for them, they did such a piss poor job on the first release, and the second release wasn't all that much. Well, it's significantly better, but I've been told that there's still significant changes in terms of how the game gets modified when you get into the living roles for Carthage, that they actually change as well. So that's one issue here. Another is, of course, the rules have changed along with those errata, and to some extent I actually prefer the old Rise of the Roman Republic ones, and it's kind of neat to have both games because I can see what the intention was. I can understand what the difficulty was in expressing that as a valid rule set for Rise of the Roman Republic. And then I can say, okay, well, here's what I'm going to do. I kind of worked out ways of working around Rise of the Roman Republic. Things that weren't, formally easy to understand in the rules, but now the rules have been kind of tightened up a little bit, and they can no longer gloss over things in quite the way they were, and the intention seems to have shifted a little bit along with that. And I think that intention shifting, I don't really agree with it. Now, maybe it's been done for good reason. I would have to look over in Consim World at, the discussion back in the era from, 2003 to 2005 or whatever that comes down to. I would rather not do that. So, I guess we should say some good things about the game. The first good thing is there ain't a lot of operational ancient stuff out there. And operational, by which I mean operational style movement, where, you're not talking about area movement. Although in a lot of ways this game actually feels kind of like a point-to-point or area movement game in terms of how it actually treats the attrition and stuff like that. You're not paying per hex in general. Hex terrain isn't all that important in general. You can usually find your way around the terrain without making things particularly difficult on yourself. It does every now and then really come into play, but nobody's going to be creating, a Maginot Line in the ancient world. You're going to see mobile armies maneuvering about and pretty much able to get around each other if they're willing to maybe walk off the roads a little bit. In fact, I feel like to some extent maybe the attrition seems a little small or a little light for some of these big movements, but it is, turns are a year and some of the leaders only get one action per turn, so yeah, maybe it's okay. It's hard to tell. Leaders can move quite a great distance, especially good leaders can move across the whole of Italy, basically, without paying any attrition if they're kind of careful. And I don't know how terrible that is. If you think about it, once Rome has the roads and the cities and such now, the stop points, the real thing that kept an army from moving wasn't the attrition so much as delays in waiting for supplies to catch up and everything, and that's the leadership advantage. The system itself is really intriguing. It grasps me in a way that it gives certain details, a degree of details that other games, even the other operational style movement type hex encounter, game of the Ancients era that I have experience with, Imperium Romanum 2, which is what I really have to compare this with the most, doesn't really provide you with. Imperium Romanum, you were really stuck along the roads. The scale's a little different. It's really more of a strategic game in terms of, the scope of the territory, the territory that it covers. It covers the whole Mediterranean, where on a smaller amount, on a little bit more map than Carthage covers North Africa and Italy. So obviously this is blown up to a smaller scale, so you can, find your way around where there are still roads nearby, where there's still passable terrain that you can travel through, but it's not what am I trying to think here? It's not like you're making, if you were to try to implement this kind of movement system with the roads and such not in Imperium Romanum, it would have to be changed drastically. The attrition would have to be much, much higher, especially for off-road movement. Because the provinces are larger areas, and it would be hard to cover it. Strangely enough, it's hard to tell what the scale time-wise is in this game. I mean, each turn is a year. Imperium Romanum, each turn is a month. So you actually have a zooming in detail in IR2 that you don't have here in terms of the time scale. On the other hand, and that may be a problem with Imperium Romanum, actually. I might want to basically what I'm thinking with this game is one of the things that most excites me, although it standalone it does provide something interesting, is, geez, could I retrofit IR2 with some of the concepts in here? And what would that mean to do that? I think it would mean redesigning a whole game, and then I kind of think, wow, I wish somebody competent would do that, because me trying to patch things together, you know, I mean, competent game designers, or even incompetent ones, tend to make their own components, right? They don't just take Imperium Romanum 2 and say, well, let me see if I can retrofit it. You know, those are dangerous drugs, Timmy. So, yeah, something of that scale and scope, a new Imperium Romanum 2 upgraded to something kind of like the Ancient World, would really excite me. Then too, like Imperium Romanum, this game immediately captures me in the, can I build, you know, a grand campaign out of this? Now, my feeling with that is obviously, well, since I was thinking about something similar with IR2 of using Republic of Rome for that, wouldn't this, you know, be even more applicable? The problem, of course, is I don't have the whole Mediterranean world here. I don't have the whole of Republic and Rome. I could probably play the first deck. The other idea is maybe something more like a Sword of Rome. Try to put, you know, hey, I've got Carthage in Sword of Rome, I've got the Greeks there, I've got, you know, all this flexibility. Can I translate that to this more historical design and get the detail of this historical design with the sort of pure sandbox open world that Sword of Rome allows? And again, interesting, you know, interesting concept. It would take probably more work than I'm willing to go through, given how much of my time I spend playing games, and different games especially, rather than modding them. Once upon a time I was more interested in that kind of thing. But they are really great thoughts, and those thoughts to me kind of rise my estimation of the game. And obviously the standalone faction of this game. There is really nothing like this out there for the ancient period that I'm aware of that really treats it in good detail. IR2 comes the closest, and it's got a very different focus. Again, more strategic, more based on, you know, this manpower, pay money to build things type of thing. That was very common in the 80s, in the early 80s. This puts you less in control of the forces that you're going to get. You have some opportunity. Hey, the Rome consul is going to call for new troops. He can't go out campaigning while he's doing that. Or he can, but it means that he has to roll a die and see if he can do both things, right? I really like the continuation, the way that works and models into the system. I'm not thrilled with the Dumbvirs in the Carthage system, which, you know, a pool of leaders who all work on the same shit, and you have to kind of move them all at the same time. That's very restrictive in terms of flexibility, but the problem is, of course, if you gave them each their own counter, that would probably be, well, if they each had their own singular counter, that would be fine. But if instead, like most of the Roman magistrates, and I'm not sure I like how the Roman magistrates work, if they each had a set of counters, so like the Roman magistrates in both these games, the consuls, they share a set of counters. So they have a great deal of flexibility of which consul you want to move first. You can't pile all the actions over onto one, although I tried to do that and I think kind of managed to cheat that way in Rise of the Roman Republic, but I'm pretty sure that's illegal in there too. Mechanically though, so there, now we segue back to the bad stuff. Mechanically, there's a lot wrong with this game. A lot wrong. Not just in terms of the mechanical complexity of coping with it. First of all, it's rules by special, you know, special exceptions. You know, it just lots of specific little rules to handle the governments of Rome and Carthage, and that's the flavor of the game, man. Without that, you got nothing. But it's hard to remember it all. I enjoy playing it as long as I don't get anal about trying to figure out whether or not I'm doing it right. You know, if something feels wrong and I look it up and I see I've been doing it wrong, oh shit, and I'm on camera, so I'm doubly upset. By myself, well, the hell with it. You know, I'm not that upset by it. And that being upset passes pretty quickly. Did I mention the rules are a mess? Rise of the Roman, especially the scenario-specific rules, the playbook rules. Carthage gets them a little better, but they're still, the core system is fairly clean. Once you get to the specific political rules, they become a real headache, especially when it comes to assigning the leaders to the Romans. And it becomes especially a headache to me in Carthage, where it seems like they nailed it down, and either I was playing it all wrong in Rise of the Roman Republic, or I think more likely I caught the idea behind Rise of the Roman Republic, and they kind of made that idea not quite work over in Carthage. So about the mechanical complexity, you have tons and tons of little pieces for every, for every type of nationality, for strength point markers. And you just end up with piles of them in your armies, and you're constantly having to make change with them. That's a bitch. And like I said, little tracks, I ended up using them for the Carthage scenario. For Carthage itself, seemed to work a little better. Less access to your sorting piles, that kind of style works fine for something like Here I Stand or Sword of Rome, where there aren't so many pieces. Keeping track of all the different nationalities doesn't seem to matter anywhere near as much as it should. Maybe there's some augury events that make it required, but basically, so Carthage has like, I don't know, maybe a dozen different nationalities that they can pull together. I think it's more like 9, that they can pull together and build their armies out of. And most of them just don't matter. You've got some distinguishment. You got infantry, you got cavalry, you got elites of both types. Gauls matter. There might be a couple of scenario-specific units that matter, but I feel like maybe something like Hitler's War, where the Italians are, they're just a specific unit. You put a marker on top of all the Italians and you say, those are the Italians. You could do that kind of with the Gauls. You could just put a marker to flag which are Gauls. Or hell, an extra set of counters for the Gauls. Instead of having to deal with 9 different counter mixes with 2 different types of units, or maybe 4. In some cases you have elites in both infantry and cav. Other than the mechanical, and then you're constantly changing little counters that are reminder counters, for the quality of the troops, or for Carthage, how many troops they've lost over the turn. The tracks help that significantly, but there's still a lot of fiddling going around. Is it at my limit? No. I mean, I played Battles of the Age of Reason, and I couldn't handle the amount of mechanical complexity of that game. This is probably no less than that, but somehow it doesn't bother me as much. Maybe because it's not dice rolling all the time. I really hate having to roll. But it can get that way. So, for example, with the new siege rules in Carthage, the old ones didn't have this, but with the siege reduction rules, you roll a die, see whether or not you reduce the city. Well, you have a very small chance, not tiny, but you have like less than 50% chance of reducing the city. But you probably have greater than 50% chance of getting a continuation. So you just keep rolling them and you keep reducing the city. And of course, the guy inside the city has the same coming back up. I don't think during the scenarios, I don't think I ever actually repaired a city. I probably had options to do so and just failed to, which may have probably led to the Romans having an advantage actually over in Carthage, given the length of time it took them to siege Lily by anyway, overall, if you can tolerate that mechanical complexity, if you can tolerate rules that are both a little bit fuzzy in the final implementation that I've seen, and very, very shaky. I mean, almost, okay, the rules are a mess over in Rise of Republic, Roman Republic. They get shaky in Carthage. Maybe they're okay in the living rules if you can cope with, making your own rule book or something like that. I don't like to do that. I'd rather make my own rules in my head, fudge it as I go. So if you can cope with those things, you've got a game that gives you kind of an exciting interplay in terms of the actual tactical movement on the board. It is more interesting than Imperium Romanum. And I'd say it's more interesting on that aspect by far than your point-to-point or area movement games, even if the effect is very similar. You don't have that whole hand of cards, that's really exciting when you're playing in an opposed game, trying to hold back a card that you can use or whatever. You've just got this chit pull, you're pulling from it, and that's kind of randomly placing your situation. Combat, as long as combat's not an absolute blowout, and blowout isn't necessarily by troops, leadership and other factors are more important than the number of troops, but as long as it's not an absolute blowout, combat's very random. It's fairly random even if it's a blowout. It's just, who's going to win. You just may not know how well they win. I really liked the political rules in Rise of the Roman Republic. I thought the means of, capturing a city or winning a battle or something, converting cities, felt very much like the same kind of mechanisms that are present in Sword of Rome and a lot of CDGs. And in Hannibal, the Great Aulic game. I love that game for its simplicity. A little too much die rolling, I think, in that as well. But this sort of, hey, I want a battle, and now some cities are turning towards my side. Or maybe in the Carthage, the big First Punic War scenario, if I win here, Syracuse is going to switch sides. Or if I capture this city, Syracuse is going to switch sides. And that changes the dynamic inside inside Sicily. So there's, to me, a lot to like about this. There's a nice story that it tells. It might be more interesting the way I was tracking the people in Rise of the Roman Republic. I got kind of lazy about that in Carthage because it became obvious it wasn't necessary to do it for the most part. I just had to flag the people who, had gotten a triumph or were currently eligible for one. There's a lot of reminder counters. That's part of the mechanical complexity. But maybe not quite enough. There's a few that are missing, and that's kind of the thing. You gotta figure out your way to cope with the game. Some of the stuff isn't trivial. You have to. It isn't presented to you within the game in an easy to use manner. You have to maybe make a little sheet of paper to keep track of some stuff. Throw some counters on the board that don't come with the game or whatever. Likewise, you maybe have to make up some rules to make it work for you. The earlier back in the roll section you go, the better, the more likely that's going to be the case. So yeah, I mean, I enjoy this game. There's a certain level of respect for it. I've got to decide. I kind of put a 6 down for it. I'm leaning more towards a 7 to it. I think it's too flawed and, not, I don't know, there's almost this break for me between like something like this that shows a lot of promise and seems fun and I'm enjoying myself and everything, but has a lot of negatives to it. And the way I feel about something like Europa Universalis or La Grande Guerre, which are also incredibly flawed games, but right away they kind of grab me with the, my God, this is just so fantastic. I don't care if I have to make up half the rules to play it. This is fantastic. I don't feel that about this. I feel like, there's a solid kind of fun game here. I'm not sure that the fun value is as high as in, say, Sword of Rome, but it gives a lot more detail to the story, and that pleases me in a certain way that's different from fun value, whatever that is. So I'd probably rate it about the same, and then I say, well, I want to kick it down a little bit because got some problems with it. There's no question. Some of those problems aren't just... there are design problems in terms of the historicity. This was brought up to me. You know, I wasn't terribly good at watching this, but I know I've seen a couple myself. But one that was really hammered on me was, hey, look, you know, if you throw a siege on someone, and even if you blockade it and everything, they can slip their troops in. The Carthaginians can always get their troops into a port after the winter. And that doesn't work. So first of all, there's indications in the history, in Polybius, that it was not easy for them to resupply and get their troops in over a couple of years that were at siege. And then, that may not be absolute, but even if you sort of do a thought experiment on it, saying, well, maybe that was one period of the war and then they were able to reinforce and bring supplies in later. Another thing is that, well, look, if I'm able to get the Roman fleet there to intercept it, there should be, and there is this Praetor counter, which is the Roman reinforcements coming, there should be something equivalent to that for the Carthaginian reinforcements. They shouldn't just appear at the beginning of the year automatically. There should be a reinforcements counter, I think. Unless somebody wants to argue and say, hey, I'd love to hear this, actually. I'd love to hear a good argument for why the Carthaginians are able to resupply their troops at will in early spring or whatever. You know, bring new troops in without any interference of the Navy being possible. Just, you know, the thought experiment says, hey, that should be the same as the Romans being able to bring their troops into a besieged city. If the Praetor, not Praetor, the legate, if the reinforcements legate comes out in time, the troops show up there in time. If it doesn't make it there before the Navy gets in place, they don't come in. You want to make it easier for Carthage? Throw more than one of those counters in. You know, make it possible for the troops to show up. Make it more likely for the troops to show up before the enemy gets a chance to get a jump on them. If that's what is reasonable historically. Anyway, like I said, it's something I'm glad I have. It's definitely gotten my mind thinking about the period and again trying to think about, wow, can I make the campaign for this, or can I use these ideas over in Imperium Romanum? And the answer is, of course, not. I'm not capable of it, just because I'm too lazy. But somebody, I'm sure, could. I know somebody was talking about using this as campaigns to generate SPQR scenarios, which is awesome in concept. I love that idea, but you know, how do you get your terrain for that? You could have maps, you know, from all kind of games and just randomly select them or something. And on top of that, it was fun. I mean, the core system is fun to play, and the political chrome is what kind of drives this into being something with a little bit more, you know, enough flavor to really make you like it. Although I'll tell you, the maneuvering and everything, that adds flavor too. Being able to watch someone slip around and an intercept fail and this, that, and the other in areas, in a range of space that an interception would be, you know, automatic in a sort of Rome type game. You can't just walk through the enemy, I don't believe. You can't walk through an enemy space. Well, you can walk right by an enemy and he'll fail to intercept you. And that's, to me, just so much more evocative than walking around on bubbles and getting blocked, or even area movement, although I find that more pleasant than bubble movement. Okay, let's send this up.